Russian missile attacks have killed at least 20 people in central Ukraine, two of them believed to be children, and dozens of people were also hurt. The airstrikes hit several buildings in the city of Vinnytsia. Ukraine State Emergency Service said search operations are ongoing. This appears to be the first attack in Vinnytsia since the war in Ukraine began. So let's turn now to the Ukrainian ambassador to the United States, Oksana Morkarova. Thank you, Madam Ambassador, for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
So, Madam Ambassador, can you give us some insight into the situation on the ground currently?
Yes, it's one of many, unfortunately, war crimes and terrorist acts that Russia continues to do on all territory of Ukraine. And in Vinnytsia, the latest information we have is 20 people dead, 3 of them are children, and more than 90 wounded. I mean, just a civilian object in the middle of Vinnytsia, a very peaceful European city. Russia shot rockets from the Black Sea, what we have the information from the submarine. It's a large cruise missiles, and simply hit a residential area when people were walking around, when people were just trying to have normal life, if it's possible under the circumstances. So I think by now we can say it as the fact that Russia became the largest terrorist organization in the world, and it's about time we name it, the one.
Drones are increasingly playing a role in this battle and have been giving Ukrainian military a bit of an advantage, both commercial and military drones. Now we're learning that Russia may be acquiring hundreds of armed drones from Iran. How concerned are you about this?
Well, regardless of what their plans even to acquire, they already have so much more weapons than we do. Yes, it's not high precision. It's the corruption got into pretty much all spheres in Russia, but there is so many more that they still have, and they do not have any red lines to shoot it. So we have to stop Russia, which means we are asking our partners to provide us with more weapons, but also to deepen the sanctions so that Russia cannot buy anything and cannot replenish what they have already shot at Ukraine. That's why the sanctions for Russian banks, all of them should be sanctions. That's why we're asking to designate Russia as the state sponsoring terrorism. So other countries would not be working with Russia on either selling them the weapons or in any other way.
So Russian President Vladimir Putin is scheduled to visit Iran next week for discussions on peace in Syria. What does Moscow gain from these types of talks? And what does it mean for Russia-Iranian relations as it relates to Ukraine?
I'm not an expert in Russia-Iranian relations, but what I can clearly say that, we saw that 144 countries condemned what Russia is doing in UN. The circle of countries that still talk to Russia is pretty narrow. And it looks like they're trying to visit or to talk to anyone who is in this autocratic club. What we're interested in is when President Putin and Russians will get out from our country, from Ukraine, and stop their aggression. And this is the priority number one.
Well, as you know, the war in Ukraine has had a global impact, specifically when it comes to food. Increasingly, we have been talking about the risk of an international food crisis. So if there is a bright spot, there seems to be progress in negotiations between Russia and Ukraine. Turkey is mediating. Can you give us a little more insight into what are the sticking points, what are the concerns, and how is that going?
Well, it's too early to say that there is some result there, but you're absolutely right. Russia is a source of threat, not only military threat, not only security threat, but essentially creating all kinds of crises, including the food crisis. Ukraine has been and is and will be a breadbasket, not only for Europe, but globally. And by blocking the ports, by stealing our grain, by shooting at our grain, by destroying the harvest, which we are harvesting right now, the winter crops, even under the shelling and Russian attacks on the grain fields, we still cannot get it out from our country. And thus, a number of countries in Middle East and Northern Africa really is at risk if they are not going to receive it. So Ukraine has provided a lot of options of how it can be done. Of course, the best option is for Russia to stop the war and get out. And then there will be no problem, because the only reason for the food crisis is that Russia is creating one. But we are also working very closely with UN and other organizations and with all the countries that are ready to help us with it in order to find any type of solutions there.
So, Ambassador Morkarova, I wonder, the narrative of this war, initially it was before the Russian invasion, it was if Russia invades, the fear is that Ukraine might quickly fall. Then the narrative shifted. Ukraine is holding strong. They're even having major victories against the Russian military. And now we seem to have entered into this sort of stalemate situation. What is your hope for these diplomatic efforts? And how long? I mean, I know that you probably can't share all this information with us, but what is the expectation? I mean, you talked about preparing grain stores for the winter. Could we see this war drag on into next winter?
We really hope not. Our goal is to win. We know it's existential not only for Ukraine, because we see what Russians do on the occupied territories. We saw what they have done in Bucha and Irpin, the areas we liberated, and we know what happens now on the 20% of our territory, which they illegally control. They kill, they rape, they torture, they exterminate Ukrainians. So for us, it's existential. But it's as existential for all democratic world, because if we allow Russia to win this war, Ukraine is not going to be the last one. Mr. Putin made it very clear that he's restoring his Soviet, Russian, or whatever he calls it, empire, and that everyone is at risk. Everyone who's democratic, everyone who's peaceful, everyone who believes in the values that we believe. So we have to stop it together while it's still in Ukraine. Therefore, there will be no stalemate, because Russia's goal is to destroy us and move forward and attack other countries. And our collective goal is to win. So we have to speed up this victory as much as possible. Of course, for us, it's important because we want to save as many lives as possible. Every Ukrainian we lose is a universe. We cannot afford, all these talented people, all the children that we are losing, like today in Vinnytsia. But at the same time, it's very clear what do we need in order to win faster. And we saw it during the Battle of Kyiv. If we have sufficient number of weapons, the range and the quantity, if the sanctions are deepened quick enough, Russians will stop. So we have to do it together.
You talk about whether or not this is a protracted situation. That is certainly the concern of the International Monetary Fund. And I mean, they argue essentially that's going to have widespread economic impact around the world. But before we let you go, Ambassador, I wanted to ask you about what I thought was kind of a really odd report coming from Ukrainian officials, that Ukrainians are being forcibly deported to Russia. Can you give us a little more insight on that?
That's correct. More than 500,000 of Ukrainians in the uncontrolled territories by us and controlled by Russians, especially from Mariupol and from the eastern part of Ukraine, are forcibly deported to Russia, went through filtration camps. They are stealing our children. I wouldn't even use another word. And they're trying to give them the Russian passports as soon as possible and deport them as far as in Russia as possible. So we are working with a number of partners to reach out to these individuals, at least to the adults, and to help them as much as we can to return home. But yes, it is the problem, and it's one of the war crimes Russia is committing in Ukraine.
All right, Ambassador, I will, once again reinforce that these are reports coming from Ukrainian officials. Ambassador, thank you so much for spending some time with us.
Thank you very much.